Welcome to Thrive Deeper, an ongoing conversation with Dr. Matthew Jacoby, author of the Thrive Bible Reading Guides, teaching pastor, and leader of the Psalmist band Sons of Korah. Join us as we go deeper into the Bible, discussing the passages as we read them together with Thrive. Now here's your host, DJ Payne.
Hello and welcome to episode 23 of Thrive Deeper. Guys, we are back on schedule. This is a normal Friday release and we'll be back to our normal weekly release every Friday, talking about the readings that we've just done over the week every Friday. That's the plan, at least. Let's hope we can continue that for the foreseeable future. Now, this week we've got some very special stuff for you. We get into Ezra, the first 6 chapters, the first part of this book of Ezra, going back into the Old Testament in our new daily reading guide. But before that, there's something quite special on today's episode that I wanted to highlight for you. At the beginning of this recording, when Matthew and I sat down to do it, we ended up going down a few rabbit holes. One in particular that we actually spent some time talking about was the concept of Halloween. I know it's got nothing to do with the daily reading, but it was a very interesting conversation. So in light of that, at the end of this discussion, I've put it at the end of this episode. A quite candid discussion of some of the thoughts we had around that, and you'll hear why we get into it. But I didn't want to include it into the main body of it, so after the break, you're going to hear us get into a question about Philemon, and then on to Ezra. And then after that, a special bonus at the end. All right, this has been DJ Payne. We'll be back just after this break. I think we're good. I think that is good.
Is the race on at the moment?
Oh, you are asking the person who has no idea. Recording this on the Melbourne Cup Tuesday. First Tuesday of November, Melbourne Cup.
Right.
Australia's biggest horse race.
And you're not interested.
Are you?
No, I'm not really.
Really?
Oh, I mean, part of me would like to be. I like the idea of.
I'm
100%
not interested. I know nothing about it.
I mean, not into all the, putting money on a horse and putting on fancy clothes and going out to the track. I've never been interested in that, but as a thing, horse racing, there's something about that I like.
Why? What could you put?
They're beautiful creatures. I mean, they're amazing.
I agree.
Amazing, these horses.
Beautiful. I agree.
I mean, that's what I can appreciate that.
Okay.
We've got a bit of horse.
Horse meat?
Horse racing we've got some. My grandmother's family used to own racehorses and race them. Yeah, so.
Okay, you do have that interest in there. On to Ezra.
Yeah, with Christian soldiers.
Well, actually, before we get into the book of Ezra, we've got one leftover question about.
That's fine. That's always good. That's always fine.
All right, so let's start off. Let's start off the episode with we finished off talking about the last couple of letters from Paul. We talked about Titus, Philemon, and wrapping up those those pastoral and personal epistles, letters that he sent out there. And Philemon, we really hammered down on Philemon. Only 25 verses, one little chapter, but what an amazing book! What an amazing book. You even chose to preach on it. On Sunday, on this past Sunday. And the response has been very interesting. People are, going, I didn't really think about this book really much at all. And we've had a question about this book, and this is a typical question we get about the character of Paul, the person of the Apostle Paul. Yeah. And someone has written in, the wonderful Chris here has written in, and he's asked a question about the sense of Paul being a bit manipulative in the book of Philemon, talking about Onesimus and that, using language like, I could be bold and order you to do something, yet I'm going to leave it to you to do it out of love. You owe me everything, you're very life to me, but, I'm not going to call you on that. If he's done any wrong to you, charge it to me and I'll pay it back. I'll write to you knowing that you'll do even more than I'm asking. And some people read those type of passages and think, is he just being a really manipulative, horrible person?
It's a good question because it certainly sounds like that. But
and here's a side question.
Yeah.
I read those verses and I think he sounds awesome. Does that make me a horrible, awful, manipulative person?
Well, let's assume it does. The point, what we've got to remember, it's a very personal sounding letter.
Yeah.
But it's addressed to the whole church because he says, to Philemon, and then at the end of verse 2, and to the church that meets in your home. Now, why is that important? That's important because Paul is putting this forward, this letter, as an example of the implementation of a new way of living.
Yes.
This is the imagery that I used when I spoke on this on Sunday, and that my sermons are available online as well. You can just Google my name. Encourage you to have a listen to that if you can. But the imagery I use is that of an operating system. This is a new operating system. Paul is talking a lot about this kind of new kingdom realm, this kingdom operating system, that we're part of something new. And there's a whole new way of doing things now, relationships are completely redefined. Mm-hmm. Everything's redefined in God's kingdom. And what's happening in this letter is that this is not just a personal letter to Philemon. It's a letter that he puts forward to the whole church as an example of this new operating system being implemented, right? Mm. And that new operating system has a lot to do with even with leadership or in terms of what it means for one person to have authority over another. Now, this is very relevant to Philemon because Philemon is the slave owner of Onesimus, who's the slave, right? Mm. And so there's an issue of, well, he owns this guy and he's his boss. But Paul wants to say, no, and I'll tell you, this will become clear how this answers the question in a moment. Yeah. So what he's basically wanting to implement is the Galatians chapter 3 principle. There is no Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female. We're all one in Christ. And he says he wants Philemon to receive Onesimus as a brother, as an equal, to put behind the old way of seeing things, in which the slave has no status at all, barely even considered human. Mm. So he wants to redefine that relationship, to flatten that relationship. Now, what Paul is doing in the way that he's writing this letter, he himself is demonstrating that approach, which is why he makes such a point of saying, look, I could order you to do this, right? But I'm not going to do that because I want this to come from your heart. Mm. And this is... He here is making explicit. I know it sounds like manipulation, but it's actually a teaching moment where he's saying, "This is how things work now, right? I am demonstrating a new kind of leadership in which I'm not going to force you to do something, but I'm going to point you toward what is right, and I'm going to appeal to you in love, and look for something that comes from the heart." Mm. That really is why he makes such a big point of what otherwise sounds manipulative. Yeah. Hey, look, I could force you, but hey, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to... he's really making a very important teaching point. And he's drawing attention to the fact that he, as the leader of the church, is implementing this new way of doing things in which we don't, as Jesus says, we don't lord it over each other as the Gentiles do. I think it's in Mark 9, Mark 10 maybe. So that's what's going on there.
Okay. So the challenge for you when you're reading Philemon is to take out the passive-aggressive tone that might be in your own head and say, actually, he's trying to teach... imagine if you're speaking to someone who hasn't gotten these concepts before, is used to a leader saying, "This is what you do. Go do it." Yeah. How would you respond in that situation? How would you write it if you was Paul? you'd probably end up writing it the same way.
Yeah, that's right.
You know?
So it's actually very countercultural, the way that he speaks to someone who is, in a sense, under his authority, and Philemon would have understood that, would have really looked up to Paul, and the way that those kind of relationships in a worldly sense worked in a very authoritarian manner. I mean, that's the way that it was. There wasn't any other kind of leadership in the ancient world. Paul actually is being very countercultural here, but he's also drawing attention to it because he wants to model to Philemon how he wants Philemon to deal with those under his authority.
It's almost like an overlap of two cultures.
Yes, that's right.
He's saying, look, this is the old way, but I'm expecting the new way.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
then the new way, you go beyond what I ask you to do. You do it out of love. You do it out of the air. Okay. All right.
So that's Philemon was the last book that we read in the New Testament. And the way that the Thrive Bible Reading Guide works is that we do one New Testament edition of the Thrive booklet, and then we do two Old Testament. So we get that back and forth movement. So we go back to pick up where we left off, because we were talking about Ezekiel and Daniel and that exilic literature that came out of the exile, and we introduced this in the last episode, talked a little bit about the exile and the return, and that brings us to the book of Ezra.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go. So this past week, we've gotten into the first story. There's basically, in that concept of Ezra and Nehemiah being one collective works about this time of them coming out of the exile's return, we have three acts, and they are three parts of the return. The first two of them are in Ezra, and one of them being Nehemiah.
Yeah.
And the two in Ezra are Zerubbabel, then Ezra, and then Nehemiah. They're the three big returns that we read in those two books.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So this past week, we've been looking at the return of Zerubbabel.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Zerubbabel does return. Actually, the one that's leading the return. So just to go back, let's just go back a step to recap.
Great.
So 539 BC, the Persians who have already been chopping off bits of the Babylonian Empire conquer the capital. So they've got now the Persians have overrun the Babylonians. Babylonian Empire ceases to really be as a force. So Cyrus marches into Babylon. His policies, Cyrus is a much more benevolent dictator. He's still a dictator.
They can. I know we laugh at that, but there has been some benevolence.
That's right. He has a different policy, and his policy is to allow the people groups that are part of his empire, because he conquered all different areas, from Egypt right up through Palestine, the Hittites, right over to the east. So he allows nations to observe their own religions. He gives them sort of cultural autonomy, I guess. Mm-hmm. They can do what they want to do. Now, part of that is that he then allows the Jewish people to return. Now, the question is, and no one's asked this question, but this is a good question that perhaps you should have asked, is why does he even take note of a relatively small people group in his midst? Why take any notice of this Jewish people? Okay, and the answer is for a couple of reasons. First of all, they did continue to exist as a very distinct people group. Like, they were notably distinct, so much so that they can distinguish themselves from other people right through this point. So the tactic of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, which was to draw a people, the leading people, into Babylon, take them into captivity, not put them in prison and mistreat them, but settle them there so that they would assimilate and become Babylonians. That was sort of cultural. They were looking for sort of cultural homogeny there, but that didn't work with the Jewish people.
No.
They wouldn't assimilate. They held on to their beliefs. That's the first reason. The second reason was that God blessed them, there are a number of them in leading positions. At least some we know, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and of course, Mr. Daniel,
Yes.
who was well known to us, leading positions in the empire. So they certainly would have drawn his attention to the Jewish people, and he issues an edict that allows in 538 BC. Which was very much in accordance with his policy that the Jews can go back and they can rebuild the temple and offer sacrifices and pray for him.
Now, a couple of little points here that we have to make is that is 70 years to the dot from the first. Yeah, that's right. When Jeremiah said you're going to be in 70 years, it's to the to the year.
Yeah.
There.
Well, by the time they get back and make their mark and lay the foundation of the temple, that's 535, and that is 70 years on the dot from the time that Daniel went into exile.
And it's also important when we read these books and we sort of keep them separated, and we don't sort of see a lot of crossover sometimes, but it's important, like you said, Daniel would have been living as an old man, waving goodbye to Zerubbabel and Ezra and all of those guys, saying, go, like he didn't go himself, but he was there helping them to go.
That's right. And he was the one that looked at the prophecy of Jeremiah, and it was the prophet Jeremiah who prophesied that the exile would be 70 years.
Yeah.
Enormously significant. It would be 70 years. It would be like a sabbatical for the land, as it were.
Yeah.
And look, it's just remarkable. It really is remarkable.
And not only that, you've got the prophet of Isaiah years before that saying that King Cyrus will be my mouthpiece one day.
That's right. Yeah,
God saying that I'm going to use this guy.
That's right. Unless of course we talk about, as some people do, there being a later prophet who writes in the Isaiah tradition.
Yeah.
Because the second part of Isaiah, I mean, we're getting down a rabbit hole here, but the second part of Isaiah is clearly written with the exile as a past event.
Yes.
Now, certainly Isaiah could have done that. The original Isaiah could have done that as a prophet. But that has certainly caused some to say that there's an Isaianic tradition of prophecy here that is continuing in the exile. Anyway, let's leave that one behind. That's just an option there. So they actually go back under, it's actually a guy called Sheshbazzar who is appointed governor. I mean, the title that he's given is a little ambiguous. We're not sure exactly what it means, but he's put in charge. And he is a member of the royal household, and he's actually Zerubbabel's uncle.
Okay.
So it's actually, he's the one that, and Zerubbabel goes back with them, but he initially is the one that's put in charge. And somewhere along the line, we don't really know what happens to him, but Zerubbabel takes over.
Yeah.
And I think somewhere in the midst of the temple, building the temple. So in one source, it talks about Sheshbazzar built the temple. Yes. And then elsewhere it says, but Zerubbabel built the temple, and you've got scholars saying, well, what's going on here? Well, it's probably a matter of that they kind of both did. One started it and the other one finished it.
They're definitely two different people. They're not different names for the same.
One suggestion is that they're alternate names for the same person.
Same as what we got the Babylonian names for Daniel and Shadrach, but that type of thing.
Yeah, possibly.
I
think. Look. I mean, the most the idea that one began and the other finished it off. That's I think the most popular,
because it took them a while.
Option.
It took them a while to get the temple built.
It certainly did. So what happens is they begin building. They lay the foundation. Actually, no. The first thing that they do is they build the altar.
Yeah.
Now the altar is a large. So don't just think of a small table. The altar is quite a large platform, raised platform that with stairs going up to it, and that's talking about the altar of burnt offering. Yeah. Where they would have had a fire there, and they sacrifice the animals and they put them on the fire as an offering. Yeah. And
it's almost like
and that stood in front of the actual temple building. So it was within the temple courts,
yes,
but it was in front of the temple building.
Okay, so it's almost like a working butcher and a fire pit.
That's right. So they do that first, and then they set about laying the foundations of the actual temple. It's unclear to me here. Are they talking here about the platform? Because if you go to Jerusalem today, you'll see that the Temple Mount that exists is an enormous platform.
Yes.
Now, that platform was the extended large version, the one that exists today, that Herod the Great
added on
in around 37 BC. Solomon's platform would have been about half that size, but are they rebuilding that? Are they rebuilding the platform? Is this what's happening here, or is it the actual foundation of the building
that they're building
that housed the holy place and the most holy place?
Yeah.
It could well have been. That. Whatever the case, I'm unclear on that, and I'm not sure if the text makes that clear. But whatever's the case, when they laid the foundation, and some people are rejoicing, and other people are devastated.
Yeah.
Because it suddenly becomes clear to them that this isn't anything like the glory of what we left behind.
No.
And to understand and actually says there, it says that you couldn't tell, but with all of the noise, who was weeping and who was rejoicing.
Yeah.
Because it was wonderful for some people, but for other people it was an absolute tragedy.
Those born in the exile, those young men, like the Ezras,
thinking, this is fantastic.
We are here. Let us the people who remembered what they had lost and the stories of Solomon's temple and the Shekinah glory and everything. They're like, this is nothing.
Weeping. What's going on here? This is, and I think that's interesting because the people came back with very high hopes. They had been listening to Daniel and Ezekiel and they responded to that prophetic message and very much the prophetic message of Isaiah as well. And so they're coming back to be part of a sort of an eschatological age. This is the end times, and we're going to be part of it.
The fulfillment of the prophecies that we've been reading.
Okay, so this is the coming of the kingdom of God right now. And we're going to go back and. They had the prophecies of the visions of Ezekiel. I mean, think about that. At the end of Ezekiel, you've got those chapters about the new temple and how glorious it's going to be. Not only that, but you've got the memory of the old temple. So it's a bittersweet, it's a strange, bittersweet moment. And that actually carries through because as they start rebuilding the temple, there's immediate opposition.
Yeah.
And the opposition, it just says there actually Israel's enemies. It talks about Israel's enemies. Now, these were actually the people who were resettled by the Assyrians up around Samaria in the northern kingdom. They were the remainders from in 722 BC. The Assyrians destroyed the northern kingdom. Remember, we're going back to the time when there was the 12 tribes of Israel. Israel was split in half. You got the northern kingdom, 10 tribes in the north. You got the 2 tribes which sort of really become one. Judah and Benjamin. They really become Judah.
Yep.
They become known as the Jews.
Yep.
And the northern kingdom is destroyed by the Assyrians in 722, and they take the survivors, at least the leading survivors, into exile, and they resettle. They replace Assyrians in that northern kingdom. And they actually, there's that incident with the lions. I don't know if you remember that from 2 Kings, I think it is, where they feel that they need to make sacrifices to the God of this land. And so they find out how to do this. So these people end up observing some kind of syncretistic religion that's a mixture of the old.
And there still would have been, even if it was just a few Jews, both of the northern, and there's a few remnants of bits and pieces sort of floating out there as well.
Yeah.
And so they're
a hybrid. Yeah. They're a hybrid people. Original Israelites have intermarried with the Assyrians. Yeah. The religion is this mixture between the two. They're based around Samaria, and they are called Samaritans.
And again, let's not forget, they've observed history
Yeah.
of both. They know what happened in the past with, the whole history of Moses and the Promised Land and all the kings that have come through. They've seen them turn their back. They've seen them go away, and now they're seeing them come back.
Yeah.
And is there a sense that they're like, we want to be a part of this?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Let's go.
Yeah.
But this is where it gets weird.
Yeah. They want to be a part of this, and but they're sort of disbarred from that because of the nature of the faith that they are practicing, but also because they have intermarried. Now, this is an interesting issue because already in those early chapters where the genealogies and it explains who went, there's some curious statements that are made about people who weren't able to authorize their family tree.
Yeah.
So they weren't able to actually prove that they were descended from Israel.
Yes.
And so they weren't allowed to be part of it.
Yeah.
This is this sounds really exclusivist, and actually it was.
Yeah.
It was very exclusivist.
Are they being like a classic a classic thing that happens with families that move, that immigrate to a country?
Yeah.
Is that those older ones who are maybe born in another country, when they come to the new country, they assimilate faster into the new culture and want to be, like, for example, people come to Australia, they might have a couple of kids that were already born in whatever country they're coming from. They come here, they get made fun of for their accent, and within a year, they're more Australian than any Australian. They are right into Aussie culture. They're Australian as. Yeah. Then the new ones that are ones that are born over here, they hear the tales about the motherland, and they're like, oh, they're very fascinated where they come from, and then when they go back to it, they really want to take on their culture. Is it a thing where these guys who are born into exile have heard all the stories of all the dramas that have happened before and all the sin that had happened before, and they're like, right, we're going to get the pendulum to swing right over here. We're going to have the the highest degree of law, order, and keeping, and do everything right. I
reckon. I mean, that's an interesting perspective. I mean, I haven't really thought about that before, but I think that may well be the case. It is, for example, it's very similar, I think, to the situation in post-war Germany where there was this pendulum swing away from the abuses of the former age of the Third Reich. And as you obviously, as you can understand, is that kind of thing happening here? We've got this new generation that are saying, we are going to get it right this time. We are, and actually, I think that certainly is happening. I mean, what the reasons are, whether they're being reactionary, I think they are being reactionary to some point because they have been absolutely inundated with these prophetic writings. They come back with the books of Joshua right through to Kings, which is all about, explaining that this happened because of the idolatry. This happened, idolatry. Now, the interesting thing is, from this point on, you don't hear anything about idolatry.
Yes.
It actually, I mean, the Jewish people, they have other issues going on, but idolatry isn't one of them.
No.
You don't hear anything more. It's like they are cured of this. Yeah. In that form.
Yes.
And so I think there is certainly a reactionary thing going on there, and part of that is this ethnic purity thing, that we are going to make sure that we remain distinct. So it's not just exclusivism for the sake of being of exclusivism.
Yeah.
It's a sense of purity that we're called to be distinct.
Yeah.
And we will not include anyone who has possibly intermarried. Mm-hmm. So it's why that they, in those early chapters, they're not going to include those who cannot prove that they are of pure Jewish descent, because people would have intermarried in Babylon. And they don't want those people to be included. Now, intermarriage is going to be a big issue in the book of Ezra.
Massive.
It's going to be a big issue. And this is sort of laying the foundation for that, even at this early stage, where it talks about them not being able to prove their descent from Israel. And the reason for this has to do with the distinctness principle. Now, this is a small nation state. It's 42,000 that go back in all. And this is a small nation state sandwiched in between enormous empires. And the greatest imperative for them is to remain distinct. The moment we intermarry, we lose our distinctness. And of course, as I said, they came back armed with, for example, the books of Kings, right? Mm-hmm. And the books of Kings is really explaining to them how did they end up in captivity among the nations? Mm-hmm. Well, it all started with Solomon, didn't it? Because what did Solomon do? He intermarried with these other women, and they drew him away to worship foreign gods. So these people are coming back to the land saying there is no way that we're going to make that same mistake again. Because intermarriage and idolatry go hand in hand in their minds.
Yes.
And in fact, in all of the warnings, they go together. In the Deuteronomic warnings, they all go together. Yeah. You intermarry, you'll end up in idolatry. Yeah. The story this book of Judges vindicates that. Certainly the story of Solomon is a vindication. I mean, no one was more godly than Solomon at the beginning, and no one more blessed. And yet, because he intermarried, as the story goes, he was drawn into idolatry. This is the lesson that they're taking with them into this new life.
Okay, here's a question. To zoom back out,
which is, sorry, let me just interrupt. Which is why, because I just need to root this back into what we're talking about here. Which is why when the Samaritans say, "Hey, can we be a part of it?" I mean, we would think, "Oh, come on, let them be, let them jump on board, awesome. Right? Isn't it an open, isn't it an open kingdom?" Well, not yet. Yeah. Not really yet. You know what I mean? It is going to be, but there's something that they need to get right and embody first, and that's the principle of distinctness. And now isn't quite the time.
Okay, here's my radical question here, because we see, like, the overview of Ezra and Nehemiah are this, the basic three returns and the leaders of each of these returns, and there's not really a happy ending for any of these return things. Like at the end of each of their periods, it's like, oh, well, this sort of went, okay, but it wasn't great. Are they being too zealous? Are they really?
That's a good question.
Are they taking it too far?
No, in that respect, they're not taking it too far, because they're taking that, and I think the way that the text of Ezra puts it is that they are getting it right, because later in the book we're going to see that a later generation gets it wrong. Yeah. So that generation, man, they're really standing up for their faith. But the next generation, they're going to intermarry, and that's going to be a very big problem. Yeah. And actually the solution is going to be quite radical, and I know a lot of people are going to struggle with that when you get to it. Yeah. But this is where you need to hold on to how big an issue this was for this people. Yeah. I mean, they are going to disappear. They're going to dissolve as a distinct entity if they intermarry. That's a fact. Yeah. So the intermarriage thing is a big spiritual issue for this people. You're right, getting to your question, in that it's not really a happy ending, in the sense that overall, throughout this period, people end up being disappointed.
Yeah, there's...
because all the things that they wanted to happen straight away aren't happening straight away. Now, all through this time, the prophets are saying, God's going to do his thing. Hang on there. Don't despise the day of small things, because that big things are going to grow from that. And God is certainly, look at the book of Zechariah and all of these amazing prophetic utterances and towards the future, and Malachi promising the Lord returning to his temple and so forth. Yeah. But what happens, I mean, as soon as getting back to our story, as soon as they lay the foundation of the temple, I mean, they fall on hard times. I mean, they're setting up their own lives. Yeah. They've got to rebuild towns from scratch, and they've got to replant crops, and there's so much work that they've got to do. And add on top of this the fact that Cyrus actually died, and his successor, he died in 530, and his successor, Cambyses, was really a despotic ruler who really plundered his subjects, and particularly this area, and put heavy taxation on the people. So not only have they got the challenge of setting up their lives, the funds that are meant to come from the royal treasury because that was what Cyrus promised to do.
And they gave them, they had quite a few funds to start it off.
Yeah, that's right. So the funds that he was promising to fund the rebuilding at his death, that supply stops, and so they're on hard times here, and so naturally it gets the project gets left. Now I want you to imagine this. You've got the foundation is laid, and it's going to sit there for 15 years. Now, virtually untouched for 15 years. Now, you think about what that's going to look like after 15 years. It's going to be overgrown with weeds and whatever. Yeah. It's going to be a sorry sight.
A tip.
Yeah. So this is where Haggai, Zechariah come in, and their message is basically, guys, what priorities? Yeah. Like, yes, you have been struggling, but it's actually been much harder than it needs to be. Why? Look at, that your crops have failed. You have, and their message is, you really haven't been trusting in God. You haven't been seeking first the kingdom of God, and then trusting that all these other things will be given to you as well. And these prophets stir them up and get them back onto the job. And finally, in 515, they complete the temple. Now, the city is still in ruins, by the way, at this stage. The city walls are still all in ruins, but the temple is completed by 515.
So we'll wrap up with this one, and we're finishing off the first part of the return here with the Zerubbabel, and we're about to look at, I think in the readings here as we go forward, we're about to have a look at Haggai, Zechariah, the prophecies here over the next week. That's next week's reading. So this week that we've just covered, we've seen Zerubbabel, we've seen the ups and downs of that first wave back, and they were about rebuilding the temple. The next part that we will see under Ezra in the next generation is about the community and the Jewishness of the people, like they're getting back to the Torah, getting back to the beliefs. That's right, And then finally, when Nehemiah arrives on the scene, he's all about the temple walls and Jerusalem itself.
Yeah, and look, the situations change as well, and there's a remarkable section in there that's just worth one quick comment where it's actually Cambyses dies after 8, he only rules for 8 years, and Darius comes to the throne. Darius is one of his generals, actually, and he takes control of the empire. He's much more benevolent. You remember there's the story about how the Samaritans send a letter to Darius saying, hey, look what these people are doing. They're starting their temple building again. This is at the behest of Haggai and Zechariah. And this is where you see a vindication of their prophecy. It's like, just trust God, do the job, and see what happens. Yeah. And so at first it looks like it's getting worse because they oppose the building. They send a letter to Darius saying, hey, they're not allowed to do this. He checks the records, not only finds out that they are allowed to do it, but that Cyrus had promised all of these funds, and remember, this is the law of the Medes and the Persians, which can't be revoked, right? Yeah. So he says, he writes back to them, not only are they allowed to keep building, but you need to raise the funds for them actually to go towards the building. And so it actually ends up, it ends up better for them. Yeah. The opposition actually serves to remind Darius of the promises that Cyrus had made. Yeah. And again, the funds that they needed, once they start building, the funds actually follow. Yeah. And this is a classic example of seek first the kingdom of God, and all of these other things will be given to you as well. It was a risk to start building. Where are we going to get the money? I mean, but no matter, they start building, opposition comes, opposition turns against them, and Darius sends in the funds. It's an amazing story.
Is that? I remember the reading that was happening on Tuesday of this week, which you had both a reference. We read it through Ezra 4, and also then we flipped over to Matthew 6. You had a bit of Matthew 6. Is that the?
That was really their going back to their, their resolve that they're not going to mix. They're not going to mix with these nations. We're not going to mix. They do things in a completely different way. I mean, they wanted to adopt a completely distinct way of living, and that reading from Matthew is the one that talks about you can't serve two masters at once. You can't serve two masters, and I think we we need to recognize that as Christians that we have actually stepped into a completely distinct way of life. We are living for a purpose that is completely different reason for living, for which most other people live. And that distinctness, actually, what is it that makes you different, really? It's not you being more moral than other, or it's not just that. It's actually at a bigger level, like you are part of something bigger. There is an overarching sense of purpose, God's purpose, that governs your life and your path and makes you completely distinct from other people.
The Book of Ezra, Part 1, in the can for episode 23. If you've got any questions, you know what to do. Head over to thrivetoday.com.au. Hey, that rhymed. I think I might have just come up with a jingle there. Now, as I said on the last episode, if you want to do something for us, a great thing that you could do is share this episode online. Why don't you make a post on Facebook? Let everybody know about the podcast. That would really help us a lot. Now, at the end of this show, what is usually the end, keep listening, because a sneaky discussion that Matt and I had as we recorded about the concept of Halloween. Is this holiday redeemable here in Australia? If you're an American listener, please chime in. Head over to our Facebook group and let us know your thoughts. I would love to hear what you think about this. This has got nothing to do with the Thrive daily reading. It's just something that Matt and I have been talking about. But until next week, this has been DJ Payne. We'll see you then.
Thank you so much for listening to Thrive Deeper. We value all our listening community. If you are on Facebook, search and like Thrive Today page to get all of our latest updates. Our home on the internet is at thrivetoday.net.au. There you can subscribe to the Thrive Daily Reading Guide and contact us directly. That's at thrivetoday.net.au. Until next time, thrive.
Horse meat?
Horse racing. No, we've got some. My grandmother's family used to own racehorses and race them. Yeah, so.
Okay, so you do have that interest in there. Well, are you preaching on Sunday?
I am not.
Oh,
no.
Okay. It's because it's the 11th of the 11th. I noticed that. I wonder if anybody's going to do something because, at 11 o'clock on the 11th of the 11th, you're supposed to stop.
That's a good point.
Have a silence.
I don't think anyone's thought about that.
I'll raise it. I'll send I'll send an emergency note to the elders for this Sunday.
Okay.
Because at 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Usually, now the preach hasn't started by 11 in the main service.
No, that'll be just before. So, but it's right at the time when the anchor's getting up and
when the whoever's preaching is zipping in between.
Yeah, it could be done.
Zipping in between in between services.
Oh, and you get such a mixture of responses to those things anyway.
Yeah. I like them.
It's like there's some people that absolutely think we should be doing, others that think no, we should not be glorifying war in any way. Like,
but remembering
war is an evil and
remembering remembering those who've fought. I know it's a bit nationalistic or something.
Yeah,
but
there's nothing wrong with.
But we're reading Ezra, and I'm reading about the whole nationalistic thing. I brought up. This is totally out there. We'll start off on a totally out there note. I brought up on the radio show. So I do, for those who don't know, I do breakfast radio and do the breakfast radio show on a Christian radio station here in Geelong.
Yes, an award-winning announcer.
Thank you. Well, that's very loosey-goosey.
Award. A free trip to America. That's what I call an award.
Well, it was not particularly for my announcing, though. Anyway, we won't go there. I brought up Halloween.
Oh, yeah.
On Halloween, because October, we're recording this about a week after Halloween, October 31st, and
which is huge in America, and even like in churches in America as well. Halloween's coming up. and I've been to conservative churches.
Yes.
Halloween's coming up. We're going to go out and trick or treat and dress up.
Yeah.
You know.
Massive. And for now, to give you the reason I brought it up, I mean, we're a Christian radio station, and our target market is a 35-year-old mum.
Yeah.
And so every 35-year-old mum that I know, whether in the church or out of the church, including my wife, who is a 39-year-old mum of 3 boys, number one issue around the house for the week leading up to Halloween is Halloween. Is I've been invited to a party. I want to go trick-or-treating. How do I get candy? What's happening with
It's getting bigger. Is it? I think it's getting bigger.
Massively so. We're about to turn the tide here in Australia, I think, about, whether it being accepted as a cultural thing, especially for kids.
Is that a good thing?
Well, that's what I brought up on the radio. I said, hey, let's talk about this. I think this is an issue that we could talk about. Oh, my goodness. The amount of complaints that the radio station received, I might as well have gone on air and said, hey, gang, you know what's really cool these days? Satanism. Because the people rang up, the fact they didn't hear what I said. They didn't hear the questions that I was asking. They just couldn't believe a Christian radio host was bringing up the concept of Halloween or Halloween, however you pronounce it. And I was like, and I said, look, I've read all the history of Halloween, both Christian and pagan, and the roots of it going all the way back to, pretty much a few hundred years after Christ, and both the Christian and, pagan responses over the centuries, the church's responses in all different, from Rome, from, the British Isles, and then it, transmuting around Europe and then coming over to America. We can talk all about that, or we can just say it's something that's happening in our culture right today. How does we as Christians respond to it? What do we do?
Yeah.
And that was my question.
That's a fair enough question. Yeah.
And no, it was not fair enough questions. But
I was to be honest, when I first went to America in 2003, and we were being hosted by a fairly middle kind of evangelical mega church.
Yeah.
And it was all about Halloween. I mean, it was the lead up to it. It was massive, and they were arranging this and that event for Halloween, and the youth were doing something for Halloween. And look, I was a bit shocked actually. So maybe I'm on the conservative side, because I thought, isn't that like dressing up as witches and ghouls and so for me, it's always had that negative sort of darker connotation that it's not. But then at the same time, my kids loved just dressing up and going out and getting lollies from our little. We live in a little township, and all of the kids get together and they march around the township dressed up as really anything, actually.
Superheroes.
Yeah, superheroes, whatever. Yeah. A giant. Your nephew was, a giant panda.
Exactly.
So and I guess as a parent, I don't want to exclude my kids or make a big thing about that, and because it's just the kids, it's just a bit of fun for the kids. Although I know, people. My kids aren't going to join a satanic cult next week because they went out
trick or treating. And that's I actually took it one step further. I said, I think it's such a pivotal moment in Australian culture that this concept of Halloween and what is it? Now, at the moment, we have, the Woolworths and the Kmart and the Coles, the shopping centres going, ooh, Halloween. And we could stand up and go, actually, no, what we're putting on is this great big fun dress-up thing, and it has a real positive attitude, and it's about great things and community and family and life. And, yes, it's, we talk about death, but who conquered death? Have a great moment of that. That concept, totally foreign for a lot of Christians' minds because it's so drenched in paganism or Satanism, which I don't actually buy.
In a way, look, in a way I can understand that because it is, and I suppose, for people who want to take seriously some pretty dark and occult stuff that exists actually in our culture. I know it's not kind of mainstream, but it's out there and it's serious, and people suffer as more people than we would believe. I think suffer forms of ritual abuse and all sorts of terrible things, and so I think they would want to say, no, actually, that's really serious, and actually I think that is serious. It's just I suppose the conversation is about what is the connection between that and Halloween? Is it like a feeding program to that? And I'm not sure it is.
Yeah, okay, let's assume the worst. All right, let's assume that the chick tracts that I used to, hand out at Halloween in my church when I was raised in the most incredibly conservative church, let's consider that to be true. Let's consider that, here's a testimonial from an ex-witch about, Halloween being the most sacred day of the year for them, type of thing. Yeah. Assume all of that to be true. We as the church should say, that's nice, we're greater, God is greater, we're going to stand up and redeem this.
Yeah.
I really believe in that redemptive part of the church in culture, being able to – it's not like, there's this bad thing and let's respond to it. I think we have a moment to really shape culture and
I mean, these are the topics I think we've at least got to be open to having a conversation about and to be more engagement than be more engagement than disengagement oriented.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking through it myself.
I'm 100%
because it's
with
such
you.
it's still a new thing. I didn't grow up with it.
Well, none of us did here in Australia. It is a new thing in Australia. And I know for all of our American listeners, and even I think the UK is a few steps ahead of us than us.
They're probably wondering why we're struggling
America,
with it so much. What's the big deal?
I know some very conservative American Christians. Yeah. And when I first got to know them like 10 years ago, this is when my mind was rattled. Halloween was coming up and I was expecting them to say, oh, yeah, this is when we lock ourselves down or protest or guard off the witches, type of thing, believing that, believing every chick tract to be true. There's a razor blade and an apple and there's spells out every. And they're like, what are you talking about? This is our favourite holiday. This holiday is more important to us than Christmas. Mm. And I was like, what are you talking about?
It is actually.
It's massive over there. Yeah. And they told me all of the Christian, the way that they see it as a Christian holiday blew my mind. Yeah. Blew my mind how the churches over there, especially the big churches, are really making cultural impacts in the community and giving them a spiritual, alternative to the bad stuff. And I'm like, man, why don't we do that? Instead, as churches over here, I find ourselves cowering and sort of just giving in, to, the kids want to do trick-or-treating. Oh, my teenager's been invited to a party and, and we don't have an answer to it. We don't have a response other than, give in.
Yeah. Anyway. We'll come up with all the answers next week.
And this ties into the book of Ezra, such as... Oh boy! Okay, this is officially going to be. I'm going to cut this and put this as a bit on the end of the podcast because it's got nothing to do with Ezra. If you're interested into the conversation of this, I will start a conversation over at our Facebook group, which is groups/Thrive Deeper, and you can get into the conversation there. Please do not let me know how evil I am because I think we can redeem Halloween. All right. Please don't. Or maybe that's a safe place to get into an argument about it. All right, now, on to Ezra.
Yeah. On to Christian soldiers.
Well, actually, before we get into the book of Ezra, we've got one leftover question about...